Good evening. Looks to be another great turnout, so thanks for joining us, and I'm super excited about the speaker and everything. So we will get started, and with that, Larry, if you would, everyone would rise and uncover, please.
Accept our thanks for the privilege of being here and being before you. So, thanks for the ancestors we honor this evening. Help us to remember that we are all one family and between each other accordingly. Bless this food, our use, Jesus Christ.
And if we could do the Pledge of Allegiance while we're standing. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Gary, if you would lead us in the SAR pledge, and for those of you that are not members, you're glad to join along, and the words are in the program.
We descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, by their sacrifices, established the United States of America, reaffirm our faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic, and solemnly pledge ourselves to defend them against the republic.
Thank you. Please be seated. No distractions. So, before we get started and start dinner and everything this evening, I would like to take a little bit of time and ask Tom Lesser to come up, as well as Al Ernest. And I'll turn it over to Tom, but he's got a supplemental Patriot that he just got through the gauntlets, and so.
Those of you who know Al know that it took him like 8 years to get into the SAR. That's a long story we don't go into. It only took me about 5 or 6 months to get out of it. Once you have a Patriot ancestor, if you so desire, you can then apply to recognize other Patriot ancestors. And if you want to get really excited, there are members who have 20 or more Patriot ancestors. Al has another Patriot now, just approved. And that Patriot is Nathaniel Cooper. And we were able to trace all of this to Nathaniel. You want to present that to Mr. President?
I'm excited for them too. Right, so, Nick, if you want to.
Can y'all go left? Or, yeah, my left, your right. Because there we go. Only because that light behind y'all. There we go.
So congratulations. First off, 8 years. Oh, yes.
To signify that you have a supplemental Patriot, SAR as a star, you get to get a star on the ribbon with your medal, or in some cases, if you have an office, you can wear the ribbon on the office. By the way, Al has another Patriot that's been pended at the National. We'll get that.
Thank you. So super exciting, and I just put a note in there for those that don't know, but actually this predates Battle of Lexington Concord, the Battle of Point Pleasant's Lord Dunmore's War, which kind of led up to everything going on. So kind of interesting history.
And before everybody jumps, the only battle from Lord Dunmore's War that is acceptable for service to the SAR is the Point Pleasant battle that his picture was in. No other battles don't count. Sorry. I don't make the rules, I just apply.
Thank you. Next, I just want to, I think there was an email that sent out, but we're trying to get more consistent in our communications and information flowing out and everything. So we do have Facebook, we'll continue to post to that. But Nick Anderson back there has gone through and actually created our website for Col Alexander Erwin Chapter that we control and put a calendar out and everything. So we'll be pushing stuff that, and so you don't have to dig through emails and everything, you can just pull it up. So the address is on your program, but thank you, Nick, and I gotta give you a round of applause for that. I certainly could have never done that. Ed, yes. And then, we have a guest here, Ed Phillips, he is Mr. Burke County Tourism, so, and other, he's everywhere.
So a pleasure to be here tonight. I think this is my second or third meeting I've attended. It's always interesting and educational. I enjoy it a lot. So, but I want to tell you tonight, so I'm the chair of the America 250 Burke County NC Committee. And we were appointed by the county commissioners April of 24. There's 15 of us. Right now it's 14. We're looking for another one. But we applied for and received a grant. The first grant was for $10,000. And if you notice the banners that have been put up, the pole banners that are on the courthouse square, they're going up at Western Piedmont and Valdez. Rutherford College is taking some. So we spent that first money on putting up these banners to kind of generate interest in America 250. And then we also just received another grant, and this was all approved and put together by the America 250 committee here in Burke County. And so most of you are familiar with the Rev War weekend or week in late September that we've done for 25 years plus in Burke County. This year we're going to supersize it. So this year it's going to be at the McDowell House, the 26th and 27th of September, Friday, Saturday. We're also working on Friday a very unique small group tour of some special historic places in Burke County that aren't normally open to the public. And so we have got some agreements with about 4 so far. We're looking for 6 to have a place that we can take people and learn some history that you might not ever learn otherwise. And that'll be a ticketed event for that day. Tickets will be cheap, and there'll be a lunch and stuff too. But anyway, and then we're going to have an encampment, a Rev War style encampment there at the McDowell House. We have the Southeastern Civilian Living Historians committed to that. If you've never seen their encampment, it's as if you're 1750 or thereabouts. Not a military encampment, but civilian looking encampment. And then we're working with other folks in the community to also participate that weekend out there. You'll see more about that, but we have an active group with the 250 committee, and we look forward to communicating with you. We have a Facebook page, so you can look at that, and trust me, all of your events are on our Facebook page with the SAR. We're trying to keep up. You guys do a lot. So as I do all of you, thank you.
And he's Mr. Juggler. I don't know how he's everywhere doing everything, but super excited that he's leading that as we have moved into the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Just point out one thing, if anyone is interested, but there are some military flintlock pistols from English, French, Spanish, Scottish, if anybody's interested. So just want those to show, and you can handle them, just don't drop them and don't point them at anyone. So, but they haven't been fired in a while. So, but with that, I believe we're ready for dinner. Perfect. You guys are always just on time. So with that, we will start playing our food. I'm sorry, Mr. John Lafney, thank you for reminding me. I forgot it on the back of the schedule and the front of the schedule, but next week, May 20th, is Beck Day in Charlotte. So if you look at the dates on the North Carolina flags, one is Halifax Resolves and the other is Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, which predated July 4th. So we're pretty proud about that in North Carolina. A little bit of debate into it, but our next speaker next month can clarify that. But John Lafferty is kind of a point for us, and I know Kevin Alec and maybe Becca's going down there, but anybody that is thinking about that, please, reach out to John, and but we'd like to have a good turnout. Thank you. Well, with that, so that we can, we'll start the presentation when about, I would say 7/8 of you are finished eating or whatever, but we will start at this side of the room and allow the speakers table to start eating. So if you guys at this table back here would rise and go plate your food, and then as they're kind of working through, just kind of work across the room. But look forward to the speaker here shortly. I'm going to start the introduction of our speaker that I'm super excited. So a little bit about our featured speaker tonight. Jim Theofrastous, okay, has been a recovering Yankee in North Carolina for at least 32 years. He's getting better, though, is the good news. He hopes to make a full recovery, and he will reveal how someone like his unlikely surname contributed to the Plymouth colony and the colonial army. He and his brother Ted grew up as feral children roaming the wild forests and mountains of the coastal Maine. He was given the game Operation on his 7th birthday and was hooked. He knew he wanted to become a surgeon. He is proud to say that he's never heard a patient's or had a patient's nose turn red with a loud buzzing sound, which is an upside. And he also made the mistake of doing his residency training in San Diego and quickly lost interest in freezing weather. He fell in love with Western North Carolina while traveling the Smokies on his way to complete his surgical training in Durham. He was struck by the Western North Carolina's beauty, and a seed was planted. He was incredibly lucky when he completed his fellowship in female reconstructive, pelvic surgery, and urogynecology, if I said that correctly, to be able to bring his subspecialty to this region. He joined the faculty of the Chapel Hill Residency Training Program in Asheville and continues his clinical research and teaching residents and medical students. He published several research papers and textbook chapters. He became a clinical professor at UNC School of Medicine and was a reviewer for the medical journals. He and his wife, Michelle LeBlanc, also a doctor, have 3 children who are pursuing culinary and artistic careers. He retired in 2023 and moved full-time into Lake James. He has continued an active life of mountain biking, kayaking, rowing, and hydrobiking. His wife has now talked him into trying pickleball, always a dangerous one. Jim is retired from competitive 3-gun shooting and enjoys shooting at a range in Depot. If anyone is interested in shooting there and perhaps becoming a member, let Jim know. He is an NRA certified range safety officer and pistol firearms instructor. After joining this society, he built and finished a Kentucky flintlock musket, which he has shot with his father-in-law. No casualties. So we're super excited to have him tonight to present the revolutionary battlefield surgeon. So with that, I will turn the microphone over.
I'd like to thank the society for allowing me to do this presentation and for accepting me as a member a few months ago. We're extremely fortunate to have had the career that I had in Nashville. Oh, sorry. No, that's okay. Is this better? I was very grateful to the women of Western North Carolina to allow me to practice my specialty, and physicians like John Lafferty for sending me patients that we shared care with over the years. I was also proud of 2 high school accomplishments. I started with Cub Scouts as a child, and I'm pretty sure my grandmother was enabling getting the DAR Good Citizens Award by the Southern Maine chapter, of which she was a member. Did anyone here read the paper? Does anyone here read the paper, the Morganton paper?
It's an excellent paper, local news, which is pretty scarce. It was my laser pointer. I was relieved when I got the paper last weekend and discovered that on the right-hand column where they usually list these lectures and the speakers, I wasn't there. So few, a relief. Unfortunately, on page 14, my entire introductory speech, which Kevin was so glad to make, I would be embarrassed to say, was listed there, and I was horrified, quite honestly. Shout out to Thornhill Books, or that's where I get my paper and my coffee every Saturday. Full disclosure, I've never been on a battlefield, thankfully. The closest I ever came in my training was an inner city Washington, D.C. hospital, which essentially was a battlefield. And I knew very quickly that I did not want to practice that kind of medicine. So the first question everyone's going to have in their mind after the introduction is, of course, what the heck is a hydrobiome? And I'm happy to say that this has given me hours and hours and hours of entertainment. There's a propeller on the back, and listen to audiobooks for a couple hours at a time. It's a great way to get around the lake. That's what's left of our dock after the mean, which is being slowly repaired. Theofrastous is not a common name in the Plymouth colony. It's actually unknown. That was my stepfather's name. He adopted my brother and I as children, and I was very proud of that. My family name is actually Sol. That's my mom, my grandmother, who I revered, my great-grandmother, who I was very afraid of, even though she's 5 feet tall. That's me, and that's my great-grandfather, Papa Sol, and he does not look very impressed with his new great-grandson on my side. But he is in the lower left there, that's Papa, and his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather were both revolutionary patriots, which I think is kind of interesting. His brother-in-law fought under Joshua Chamberlain at Gettysburg and was subsequently killed at the Battle of the Wilderness. My biological father's side also goes back. Abraham Womack was a colonial magistrate in a plantation over in the Oklahoma. So why surgery? As Kevin said, I was enthralled by the game operation. I never did find the funny bone patients. I was also strongly influenced by the TV series throughout my childhood. Hawkeye Pierce was from me. And one other physician, Leonard McCoy. Not looking very good there, Leonard. So I have some questions to get an idea of who I'm speaking with. Number one, how many of you were born before 1971? That's kind of what I figured. It'll become pertinent later in the talk. How many of you have fired a black powder musket? All right. That's right, yeah. My father and I went to the range. How many of you have fired a 9mm handgun? God bless America. And how many of you are comfortable seeing graphic images at dinner time? Okay. There will be an opt-out option. So the goals of this extremely serious presentation, whoops, that's not the right thing. I never had that happen, fortunately. Who were the surgeons? Some idea of their training and responsibilities. What caused the casualties? And how were they treated? So there will be two sort of gifts that I'll put up, and exciting things are going to happen. One is for Scooby Snacks. I will ask a question, and if anyone in the audience knows it, I ask you to raise your hand. And if you're lucky, you will receive a delicious candy treat. Secondly, whenever I'm going to put something up that is not pleasant, I will put this up first, and I will say, danger, Will Robinson. So, as a surgeon, John and I are extremely needy. We have an entire army of professionals and people that maintain the facilities that we worked in. good sterile conditions. And there's one thing missing in that picture. This is not a Scooby snack wound. Does anyone see what it is? Yeah. That is a laparoscopy screen, but I'm not sure how it was generated. Obviously, there's antibiotics to prevent infection, blood products, which I've never actually used in my practice outside of obstetric issues. The revolutionary surgeon had none of those things. And basically, sterile gloves were not invented until the 1920s. They were pretty much like latex dish gloves. Sterile gowns were not used until the late 1800s. Surgeons used to like to walk around with bloody clothing as a sign of mark of distinction. Was not around then. Surgical garb was mainly to protect the surgeon's clothing from blood. This is a less inflammatory cap in this area. But I did get this off a motorcycle leather club, and you wouldn't believe some of the emails I got after that. The surgeons would work in homes, they would work in pubs, on a battlefield, the lower left there, that's a surgeon's tent, if they were lucky to have something to protect the patient from the elements. When the war started, there were no physicians assigned to the Army or Navy. And in fact, the patriot soldiers of the battles of Lexington and Concord paid for their treatments. Half a dozen of them actually fought and then went on to help colonial and British casualties after that, which I think is pretty amazing. These were the instruments that the surgeons used. Very simple, sharp knife, different types and saws. Very few sutures, which is what that rule demonstrates. Sutures back then were made exclusively out of permanent materials, mainly thread, and that would serve as a source of infection. And the most life-saving device was what's above that. It's tourniquet. That was invented in France in the early 1700s, and it saved countless lives. Surgeons needed a lot of sawdust to collect blood. In fact, that sawdust was used commonly throughout operating rooms throughout the 1800s to collect blood. Ropes, straps, and assistants to restrain the patient because there was no anesthesia in the short time frame between the soldier being injured and when they would have their surgery. So getting drunk was not an option. Not sure what happened there. So the surgeons were essentially the same as what are called barber surgeons in pre-industrial Europe. They were very good with sharp objects, keeping them sharp. They were extremely looked down upon and thought to be very common, lowly physicians by more educated physicians, who all thought that disease was mainly going back to ancient Greece and the healing humors. They had very few medicines, a lot of herbs, mercury, which was used to treat syphilis, essentially. Opium for pain, chona bark, which contains some medications which help with malaria, and camphor, which the original formulations of Vicks had. I'm not sure when they changed. But mainly their treatment involved relieving patients of bodily fluids one way or another. And for bleeding, that's where the barber surgeons came in. They were trained to cut hair and pull teeth. My surgeon at the Old Skull downtown tells me that he was trained to remove teeth. I'm not sure I believe him, he's that kind of a guy. But surgeons would advertise their shops basically by hanging their bloody bandages outside, which is the origin of the barber's pole, with red arterial blood, venous blood, and clean bandages. I actually didn't know that when I heard this talk. The first medical school was established only about 10 years before the war. It would be another century before there was formal surgical training. Of the physicians that did have degrees, 90% had them from Europe. Less than 1% had them from American schools. Most surgeons were essentially like blacksmiths and apprentices. They worked with a surgeon for 2 to 3 years, and then went out on their own. There was no requirement to prove that you had any sort of training as a physician up until the start of 1776, when George Washington made that mandate. So the theory of disease at that time was miasma or bad air. Interestingly enough, other countries around the world, the practice started in Africa, spread through Europe and Asia. They were inoculated against smallpox as children, and that became a huge factor in the Revolutionary Wars, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So germ theory would not be discovered for another 100 years. Does anyone know what product Dr. Lister is famous for that you can still find in stores? This is our first screen. Does anyone know?
That's right.
Okay.
Listerine.
You got it. I'm pretty sure his family got royalties from that. Surgeons had a terrible reputation, basically doing more harm than good. I'm not sure what some of those terms are, but they're not good, not complimentary. This was voiced by future president Thomas Jefferson. I don't know if he came around. So the Continental Army at that point consisted of a quarter of a million men roughly. At any one time, only about 48,000 were serving. The largest deployment that I could see was at Yorktown. And again, I may be wrong, if someone else knows, but where there were more than that, just let me know. British had many more active troops, including Americans, British, and famous Hessians. So looking at the number of people who died during the Revolutionary War, it's about 1%. And at that time, obviously, the country's population wasn't that much. The Civil War, or the war between the states, wasn't much civil without it. Had twice as many. World Wars had a fraction of 1% total. So to put this in perspective, in today's population, 1% would be 340 million people. So not insubstantial. COVID killed 1.2 million so far. All right, another Scooby Snack moment. Does anyone know the leading cause of casualties in the American Revolution? Lafferty, you're a ringer. Yeah, 90% of the casualties were due to infection, and 90% of those were due to smallpox, which we'll talk about. There was very poor sanitation. And smallpox was particularly a factor in the Battle of Quebec City, which is what John Adams was referencing here. Prisoners of war were often death camps. 10% of all deaths in the war occurred in British land camps. And at sea, it was even worse. There was an infamous, the HMS Jersey, referred to contemporary as hell. 1,000 prisoners, I think it was on 7 or 8 decks of that ship. Captive soldiers were given basically an ultimatum: become a traitor or die. Has anyone seen, any of y'all seen this TV series? Absolutely excellent. It mentions the Helms, and specifically it goes into how critical Washington's espionage efforts were. I've never seen smallpox, fortunately. It is one of the most infectious diseases. Measles is pretty close, but not many people with measles actually die. 25% die. COVID is a 1% mortality rate. In Plymouth Colony, Cotton Mathers learned about inoculation from one of his slaves and had the entire colony inoculated. George Washington had smallpox as a child, which resulted in lifelong facial scarring. John Adams was inoculated at age 29 by a physician named Joseph Warren. Joseph Warren ran one of Washington's espionage rings, an incredibly interesting person. He fought the Battle of Arlington, and he personally dispatched Paul Revere. The last death of this disease on Earth was in 1977. So the Battle of Quebec City, I've talked about it a little bit, but this battle was completely lost by troops being crippled by smallpox. And this is the first time that Washington really understood that there was a danger from smallpox if his troops were not inoculated. A lot of troops were coming due to re-enlist in 1776, and there was widespread fear by the troops that they would become infected and die. Interestingly enough, I read one treatise that if we had won the Battle of Quebec City, parts of Ontario and Quebec would be part of the U.S., which topic I guess has entered the news cycle pretty recently. So European troops had a major advantage. They were all inoculated, essentially. Inoculation as children provided lifelong coverage. In fact, I saw several sources accusing the British of intentionally spreading the smallpox using infected blankets, clothing, and prostitutes. Inoculation, as primitive as it was 95% effective, but Continental Congress prohibited it, mainly because of the troops becoming disabled. And clergy preached that it was God's punishment for sin, and that they should not be inoculated. It was debilitating for troops. And the biggest issue for Washington was that if the British learned that troops are going to be inoculated and out of action, they would have a major advantage attacking on the battlefield. So, John, does this look familiar? A familiar word? Insufflation was how they would take the scabs of the pox and blow it up people's nose. This is what my first COVID test felt like. So it's pretty simple to scrape an ulcer and put it into an incision. They would quarantine the troops for 2 weeks so they wouldn't spread it. And what's incredibly amazing to me is that Washington inoculated 40,000 men secretly in 2 years. It probably turned the war. This is a great video on the History Channel that shows a barber surgeon getting some pus out of a pustule and then scraping it into incisions that have been made usually in the arm. So for the U.S., smallpox vaccine was actually from cowpox, which had zero risk of transmission. And as most of us were born after 1972, it was given 1 year, so we are that generation, mostly, except for you guys.
Yeah.
So damage on the battlefield, were mostly from musket fire, just because there are more muskets than anything else. Artillery, bladed weapons, mainly bayonets for bladed weapons. So damage from a musket ball was pretty intense. This is a musket ball, fingers here, just about that entering my body. The main issue is not so much the tissue damage, but bringing in foreign bodies through clothing, dirt, pieces of wood, or whatever. We'll talk about why that is so dangerous. So a 50 caliber rifle, this is ballistic gel that's used routinely to have bullets enter tissues. So the 50 caliber bullet would flatten and then it would pulverize any bone that it had. That's opposed to a 9mm bullet, which is much smaller. It's hard to see, sorry. Especially home defense rounds are specifically created what are called hollow points, so that when they enter a body, they will expand and do a massive amount of damage. Artillery, it's pretty horrendous to think about getting hit by any of these objects, especially grape shot, which is essentially gigantic buckshot, and the bar shot, which is invented by someone truly sadistic. When that exited the cannon barrel, it would spin, and that was why I got the named angel wings. It looked like angel wings in flight. Although if someone saw that, they probably wouldn't walk away from the experience. Edged weapons, that poor guy got an axe in the head. Those are saber marks on the skull there. I'm not sure about those other holes there, but there were not many broadswords used The most common life-saving procedure on the battlefield was amputation. And that's how we became known as saw wounds. Every single wound was contaminated, going through clothing and whatnot. And it was impossible to sterilize that wound. Okay, Major Will Robinson. So this is a photograph taken by a Civil War surgeon, who was also a photographer, for the work he did before lunch. So as I said, every wound would become infected, form an abscess, and it would lead to death. Because there were no antibiotics, there was nothing that could be done. Danger Will Robinson. So this wound looks relatively minor. It's a musket ball injury to the arm. The damage from that goes all the way up to the elbow. And I'm not sure if the surgeons recommended this or if he pleaded for it, but they did not do an amputation. They just removed the damaged tissue, and he died 7 days later from infection. As opposed to, and this is the saying, was remove the limb to save the man. Which really saved 65% of the men, 35% would die after amputation from infection. So it's not a broken record. Danger Will Robinson. There's only one word. So this shows a similar injury to a lower extremity. They did remove this man's leg, and he lived. Artillery injuries, any sort of direct hit was instantly fatal, obviously, but most of the injuries were from carts, from splinters, and on ships. Any sort of wooden, entire wood was made out of ship. I mean, the entire ship was made out of wood. All right, I think this is the last one. Danger Will Robinson. So this poor fellow is a grape shot wound, which it's inconceivable. I just don't understand how this guy survived at all, much less to get dressed up and have his picture taken. He had surgery, and he probably couldn't whistle much after that, but he lived. Head injuries, we'll talk about just a little bit. Musket balls can bounce off the human skull if they do not have any perpendicular contact. If you penetrate the skull, it's probably typically fatal. There's blunt force trauma with concussion, subdural bleeding, fracture, and brain swelling. And this is a Revolutionary British Army surgeon who drew that picture. So the treatment for any sort of brain swelling, and even today this is true, the modern emergency room is to relieve the pressure, making a hole in the skull. It's a case to throw the bone away, typically these days they keep it and put it back in. This is a procedure called trepanation, and it was thought initially to relieve people of madness or possession by spirits. And this procedure has been done all over the world. They found them going back to 200 BC in South America. And does anyone here use a hole saw? Yeah, it's essentially a hole saw. And this is a Revolutionary War hole saw kit. Very few surgeons actually had these, but when they did it could be life-saving. Talk a little bit about some of the unique aspects of naval warfare. Not so much the injury, but the treatment of the injuries was extremely difficult. Surgery was performed. First of all, this is a 12-pound cannonball. This is used on land. I was told this was Civil War. I don't know. My wife asked me, "Why did you buy a cannonball?" And now I have a great answer. Thank you. What's amazing is that's the lowest habitable part of a ship, usually where the ropes and coils are kept. And it rarely was above 5 feet. And most people at that time, the average height was 5'8", 5'9". So that picture of someone huddling over in a dark room is really a nightmare situation for me to even consider. Most injuries were from fire or splinters, although there were some snipers in the sails, which must have took a lot of guts. So the last thing we'll talk about, this is post-operative wound care, gauze, cloth. Poultices were used routinely on almost every patient using honey. Honey has been recognized as being something that bacteria can't grow in for 2,000 years. Grease, nerve, limbs, and maggot debridement therapy, everything's capitalized there. So that's a hint as to my next question. So which one of these is no longer used in modern wound treatment? Yes. What's that? Which one? I can't hear you.
Lens.
Grease. Who said that? Grease. You can buy honey gauze dressings on Amazon. It's used in professional wound treatments. You can buy medical grade maggots that are sterilized. Maggots will eat only dead tissue, so they're great for wound treatment. And there is a whole form of maggot improvement there. Snickers. So finishing up, these are my sources. These books are written in the Revolutionary Post in 1776. John Pringle's book is amazing. These are all books I got on Amazon, which are pretty entertaining. I don't know how accurate some of them are, quite honestly. And of course, websites and artificial intelligence. If you want to know the velocity of the 12-pound cannonball fired from a cannon in the Revolutionary War, Siri will tell you that it was somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 feet per second, which is supersonic and super scary. So in summary, most surgeons in the battlefield have minimal training, non-formal. Diseases kill most people. And fear of infection is the root cause of amputations, not the damage to the tissue itself. All right, well, we've got two more students next. Sugar babies and walkers. John only gave out dollar bills. So who can tell me the name of the painting on the left side?
Crossing,
Washington Crossing, Delaware. Sugar babies or walkers? He's not a ringer, I promise. All right, who can tell me the name of this not so famous painting? Washington crosses the... Close enough. Well, I want to thank you all for listening, and this is my test audience. Unlike them, I didn't see any of you fall asleep or snore, but all of these guys did. That's my favorite way to start the day. Any questions?
Jim, I've got one as a fellow doctor. Was there any, Larry, who was also a physician, we were talking, did anybody enter asthma? Is that just something that was not done? And why don't you tell them why? I mean, I think I know, but.
Well, it died.
It was considered so risky.
Yeah.
To open somebody, I mean, if you got hit here,
They would just pack. They would just pack abdominal wounds with lint and hope for the best. And the best didn't happen much. Yes, ma'am.
Did they use alcohol, whiskey or whatever?
Well, they did, typically the injuries were so life-threatening and on a time scale, on a stopwatch, essentially, that you couldn't ingest enough alcohol to.
Well, you can't put it on the wound.
Oh no, that's a good thought. No, they had no idea. It wasn't until Lister and Pasteur came up the next century that people even thought about it. Kevin.
This is unrelated to your presentation. Is Sol, is that go back to the Mayflower?
Yes, sir.
Because I'd seen that, I've actually was doing some Mayflower research, and I'm related to Sol back that far.
Yeah, there's a soul society that has thousands of members. So some of those people have 20 some odd children. So there's nothing else to do. Kevin.
So if you were fortunate enough to have a doctor like, there really wasn't a formal sign, like one doctor
once was a wheelbarrow. And it wasn't until the Napoleonic Wars that any sort of organized medical corps existed. Yes?
Did they cartelize, like, well, on TV shows, you see them using heat on a wheel to cartelize. Would
Yeah.
that contract the infection?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's dramatic, but all they would do is they put a tourniquet on so the person would bleed out, and then they would wrap it tight with linens and keep that on there for 2 weeks or more.
Okay.
So my father grew up in Yankton County, North Carolina, on a tobacco farm. As a child, he said he got a severe cut on his foot, on his toe or foot or something. His grandmother wrapped it in a cabbage leaf as a form of bandage or had some kind of healing properties to that cabbage leaf. And I've heard and read this before in other places. Is there a medicinal effect of that somehow?
Well, that's Siri. I'm not aware of anything in cabinet. I would think, well, maybe vitamin C, but they're not really. Cabbage leaves are 99% water. So I'm not sure.
I've heard fluid draws
Could draw some.
out.
Yeah, it could be.
I have a friend whose great-great-grandfather was shot in the chest with a musket ball during the Civil War. And all the way through his body, he didn't die from it. They took a ramrod this is his story, with a kerosene rag, ran it all the way through and on the other side, pulled the rag off, and lived to be 80.
That's pretty good.
Crazy story.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, just to tell you where we're at. I know the Second Continental Congress, the summary of Jefferson and Franklin and support Franklin didn't live there, but they argued, there's arguably those two of the most educated citizens in North America at that time. And they argued all night because it was a cholera epidemic about whether the windows of the room should be open to let the fresh air in, or the windows should be closed to keep the bad humors out. And they didn't get any sleep that night because they spent all night arguing about it. And we all know that who was right, Jefferson or Franklin? The answer is neither one,
Right.
because cholera is not spread that way.
Right,
It's
exactly.
spread contaminated
Well,
water.
it goes back to the
And
whole
germ
IS.
theory, which was started by Pasteur and Koch and all that, we're talking about 1870, 1880, about 100 years after, that they even know that germs, microorganisms, cause these infections.
Exactly.
They were just sailing 3 sheets to the wind. They didn't do anything.
Because they were walking blind, and it's amazing anyone lived.
They did.
A lot of them.
They really did.
That's why everyone died. Thanks for no one throwing up. With a worried. Any other questions? Thank you. Take my cannonball and go home.
You can leave it if your wife doesn't want to pass, I'll take care of it. My wife just asked me, are those all your pistols? So I usually only put out a couple at a time in my house, so she's confused. So, thank you very much for an enlightening presentation. Always learn something, and my running joke I always tell people is I could never be this, or I could never be a doctor, but looks like I could have been a doctor in 1770. So, just born in the wrong century, but a little terrifying when you stop and think about what everyone went through back then. And appreciate you putting that in context. And for me, at least, I learned a lot because I forget how much medicine and everything advanced between Revolutionary War and Civil War. So it's pretty amazing. With that said, great program. I just want to bring your to notice here on some past events that we've done, and then I did leave off probably one of the most important historical ones, which was, we talked about Meg Day on May 20th, but we do have more programs coming up. We do have, in June, the First American Declaration of Independence presentation. September will be our annual membership meeting, so that'll be basically members only, or those that have applied. I don't think we're gonna have a program there. And then we do have one for October listed on there, so we'll sit down more on that, but we've got some outstanding speakers and they just keep getting better, so very, very good. So thank you again. With that, Charles, would you like to, if everyone could rise, and we will do the recession, and that's on your program.
Until we meet again, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers who gave us our Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the Independence and Supreme Court, and a nation of free men.
And when we actually put in a request on that. So, thanks everybody for coming, and we hope to see you in the next program and around town. So thank you.